So we're now, I'm going to take a look at the Earth body. In the afternoon, I have a box of rocks back there, and I have some pebbles and things. We'll do exercises trying to understand the idea of what is the form germ. The mineral body of the Earth is part of an idea that Rudolf Steiner called the world mineral plan. So there's a little by the rock box back there. When you break out this afternoon to get it, there's a little flyer for a Koros event where we're just going to look at the world mineral plant for a week, for 5 days.
What's Koros?
Koros is, I have an institute, Koros, C-O-R-O-S, korosinstitute.org. And we do all kinds of presentations in the Koros Institute. We've had it for, I think, 10, 11 years, both in an alchemical sense, kind of outward, and alchemical inward, meditative life and prayer life, and we've done a lot of different presentations. Koros is a two-word, C-O-R, which is heart, and R-O-S, which is a drop of dew. So we say Koros is the dew of the heart. And we have 2 or 3 yearly events at Koros Institute. And one of them this year, during the summer, will be on the world mineral plan. We're doing one on meditation, concentration, contemplation, meditation, and prayer on Palm Sunday. We have a traditional Palm Sunday offering, usually on some type of esoteric Christianity offering on Palm Sunday. And then we do one usually in the summer, a 4-dayer on some type of alchemical idea. So this year will be the world mineral plan. So more information, korosinstitute.org. So the world mineral plant is an idea that Rudolf Steiner had. He called it the world mineral plant, animal, human. And if you were in Santa Fe, I gave a little 5-minute thing at the end of my talk on the world mineral plant, animal, human. It kind of choked me up there. This was one of those, I didn't expect that, but the world mineral, animal, plant, human is a code word for what in esoteric Christianity is called the cosmic Christ. And it's an idea that the human being was a kind of dream in the mind of the creator of the world, of a being that would be independent of fiat, but love fiat. But it was kind of a gamble. But it had to be present in the world in order for fiat to grow. Because fiat was, this is the way it's done, get in line, which is the natural order. But there needed to be something that allowed the natural order to say, well, what about this? And what about that? And what about this? To kind of ask a question. And that is the freedom principle in Rudolf Steiner's work. And the freedom principle is the ability of humans to hold pictures in their soul that are not part of the creation. This is creativity. This is architecture. This is technology. That are not in the way the forms are. The forces are part of the creation, but the forms are new. And that's a challenge for the Earth. We call it climate change. Right. So that challenge is part of the growth curve of a human. And in order for the human beings to be free of fiat, there needed to be a sacrifice on the part of the mineral and the plant and the animal to fall out of potential into manifestation. That's nature. And then the human had to fall out of potential to fall into manifestation, but a part of the mineral hadn't fallen, a part of the plant hadn't fallen, a part of the animal hadn't fallen, and a part of the human hadn't fallen, in order that there could still be potential in all of them. And the potential where all of those live is the spiritual world. So the spiritual world is still the space where potential happens, but the mineral has the least potential because it has fallen the deepest as a sacrifice. And the plant has a little more potential. It can grow and it can evolve and change in a different time frame, but it's still kind of fixed where it is. The animal has much more potential and can adapt, and primates can learn things, cetaceans have communication, all these symptoms of higher consciousness, of freedom, but still not quite the freedom of a human to speak 12 different languages instead of clicks and beeps. Well, that's different. So the human needs to be able to speak 12 different languages and then record clicks and beeps to learn the language of the cetacean. So that's different. That's something else. So the world mineral has fallen the most because it's the most ordered. It's the most the way it was in the mind of the Creator. And because it was in the mind of the Creator in fiat as a perfectly ordered relationship, that the spiritual part of the mineral is huge. And way out there. But the material part of the mineral is very, very like a corpse. Because its spiritual part is so huge and so far out that its material part is like a corpse. It doesn't mind that we crunch it up and embed it in concrete. It doesn't take it personal. And that's a picture. So the world mineral body is a very good thing to study and understand because it is a picture in the mind of the great Creator.
Is that the spiritual world of the mineral? Is that the crystal heaven?
That's a crystal heaven. That's Upper Devachan in that language. Okay, D-E-V-A-C-H-A-N, Upper Devachan. In the old language, it's called the crystal heavens. And in the crystal heavens, all beings are acting in a lawful way.
Is that also where the midnight hour happens?
I
I know it's not a place. Is that the midnight hour as well?
So the midnight hour is just beyond that. So if you know that language, there's where it says you're no longer in Kansas in Upper Devachan, that's the midnight hour. And maybe go
I'm
beyond.
going to be taking my final exam shortly, so I'm cramming. That's why I'm here.
Yeah, me too. So, yeah. Yeah. So the midnight hour is the spot where the creation as it was goes out of existence, and you're in a timeless, spaceless. So Hildegard of Bingen talked a lot about the crystal heavens, and it was a concept in alchemy for for many, many years that the crystal heavens is beyond the gate of the stars. And that it's a place of supreme order. And that the mineral realm is guided by that consciousness. So it has lost its freedom to live eternally in a lawful way. That's what it gave over. At the end of time, humans will be the stone when human consciousness becomes so ordered that it would not violate the creation. We're in the school of that now, with the rise of the great stupid regarding the climate. We're just at the edge of a huge learning curve with that. Learning to have an ordered consciousness that is so ordered that it would not violate natural law. In the old system, those called living in a sacred manner. Everybody understood that there were spiritual beings behind the mineral and the plant and the animals. And today, mineral, plants, and animals are just resources to make money. And that has what has been fallen. So to really understand plants and the medicinal aspect of plants, it's very, very useful to understand that in the mineral realm, there are certain orders of things where energy is transferred from one form to another, to another, to another. And in the mineral realm, the transformative force is through metal. The fixed form is the mineral. Chemically, a mineral is an oxide of a metal. Chemically. So most of the substances in the periodic table are metals. Because they're in the periodic table, meaning every metal is trying to become the next metal. Except for the metalloids and the non-metals, which are very few species. Most of the species in the periodic table are metals that are yearning to be the next metal in the periodic table. However, when they do that, they combine with oxygen and form an oxide, and the oxide falls into a salt that we call a mineral.
Say that again.
So in order to combine, the metal goes through a death process. It loses its molecular structure, which it's the molecular structure of a metal is fluid. It's a liquid crystal. The molecular structure of a mineral is not fluid. It is fixed. And the way it becomes fixed is through ionic exchange with oxygen in order to form crystals out of the metal form. It becomes an oxide, it becomes a salt of the metal. We call it zinc oxide, or iron oxide, or silicon dioxide. It's not silicon or silicon. That's the chemistry of this. So what we call a mineral is actually a kind of corpse of the death and sacrifice of a metal. It's kind of, and that's an alchemical way to look at it. So the minerals in the world have fallen out of their metallic nature, or partially as a metalloid. as a metal, they're very reactive through the chain, starting with the most reactive lithium, ending with the least reactive gold. And lead is somewhere in the middle there. So the old alchemy was lead into gold, meaning that there is an exchange of metals from one form to another form to another form, getting less reactive and more noble. This is just metal therapy. Send your lead to the shrink so that it is less reactive. Yeah, it's a clear picture.
What do you mean by metalloid?
Oh, there's a whole category in the periodic table of metalloids, what they're called metalloids. They're like a metal, but sort of not like a metal. They're sort of reactive, but sort of not.
Or like the alkaline earth and all those?
Yeah, there's all these. I'm not a big heavy duty chemist, but it's the metalloid is a particular family, a species, a group in there. The whole issue with this is it reactive or not reactive? The more reactive, the more energy it can give off in a reaction. So the most reactive metal is lithium. That's why a lithium battery has much more juice than an alkaline battery. It's because it's just ready to just go and give, but it's very toxic. Because it's so reactive. It gets in contact with everything and just shakes everything up all the time. But it's great when you want to shake everything up and get ions to move from one pole to another and then put them in your device and how to keep producing ions in its reactivity. That's we say, oh, a lithium battery. But that's what's happening. It's the most reactive of the metals. And you have things like boron, which are reactive. Sulfur, which is reactive, but it's metalloid. So there are these categories in chemistry. I don't want to get into chemistry because I'm not a chemist, but I've had to suffer trying to understand chemistry in order to understand what the alchemists were doing. So you have a handout here. And this language of reactive, non-reactive is the basis of plant science. So plant science and the exchange of metals between the root of a plant and the metals that are in a soil solution, that is plant nutrition. And it's governed by the clay-humus complex. Clay-humus complex. And there is a ratio between how much of these metals can be present in the soil and how much is present in a plant cell. That flow is governed by something called CEC, cation exchange capacity. If you go into soil science, that's just the whole ball of wax, CEC. cation exchange capacity. That means, can my plant root exchange metals with the solution in the soil and take things on and give things off simultaneously? If it can't do that, then the nutrient solution in the plant itself cannot go all the way to flowering and fruiting and seed production. And those metals are lithium, potassium, calcium, sodium, and magnesium. And if you looked up chlorophyll, you would see all of that stuff in there. The pigments in plants have to do with the exchange of these metals. Lithium wants to become potassium, potassium wants to become calcium, calcium wants to become magnesium, because those metals in plant pigments are what absorb light and transmit energy of light into the production of sugar. It's called photosynthesis. So there is something called a light antenna in a plant that receives light from red pigment, transmits it to yellow pigment, transmits it to green pigment, transmits it to magnesium, and in the magnesium center, the energy is changed into the ability to make sugar from the soil solution. That's photosynthesis. There's a step-down transfer of light through metals. That's, you could say this is the business end of a plant. This is how plants translate energy of light into material. So in the soil, the ability or the availability of potassium and calcium and magnesium is a critical thing for a plant. If it's not available in the soil, if it's locked up with something, the plant can't utilize it, move it up into its own sap. This is cation exchange capacity. Does it have a high capacity for exchange or low capacity for exchange? And plants over time have adapted to particular ratios in CEC that allows them to live in a niche where another plant wouldn't get availability. Some live in lime where there's a lot of calcium. They've learned how to deal with that and mobilize it, where others live in sand and they make their own calcium. Where there's no calcium, that's an oak tree. Lives in sand that has a very rich calcium in its bark. Where does it come from? Yeah, so these processes of transformation of minerals and metals into a plant are the basis for plant nutrition. And later, if you understand that, if you get a picture of that and understand that, this sequencing of these metals is something that can be meditated. There are certain pictures of the light antenna, something called a light antenna. And not just the light antenna as it is, but a light antenna as a living process. So in a light antenna, there are pigments. Pigments in plants are the source of the medicines. When we say medicinal plants, we're talking about special pigments that have been created that are phenolics and flavonoids, that are fragrances and oils, essential oils. Those are present in a plant because of the metallic nature of being able to take on and give off energy. And the plant uses those metals to protect the embryo, to filter out UV, so that the embryo doesn't get hit, to make wood to protect. So the lignification of an embryo in a seed causes the plant to change sugars into higher evolved forms of alcohols and esters and flavonoids and phenolics, like in wine. Or in any medicinal. You're up in that higher, more complex molecular structure. So starting out in the bottom of the barrel, so to speak, chlorophyll gets hydrolyzed by the plant into alcohols and fatty acids. Very kind of volatile things. And then they combine to make esters, and the esters combine to make essential oils, and the essential oils combine to make fixed oils and resins, and we'll go there as we go along. But that kind of making of a corpse of what was the energy activity of a plant to begin with, that's medicinals. It's in that process of how that plant is reacting and balancing something that's in environment. That's what your liver gets as a hit when you use an essential oil, even as a topical. Your liver is like a plant. It's a liver. And it's reacting to the toxicity of the oil to create enzymes to hydrolyze the oil so that your kidney doesn't have to take a hit. But in doing that, due to the great wisdom of the Creator, it overmakes the enzymes, and that's the healing effect. So that's what you'll learn in Kurt Schnabel, that book I passed around. It's actually, everything that's healing is a toxic effect. So the creation of that involves a red pigment, a yellow pigment, or orange, and a green, or blue-green, and then magnesium. And the mixture of all the metals and the potassium and whatever in these different pigments is how that plant is using its chemistry to protect the embryo with how it needs to do that. Is it creating wood? Is it just creating, look at your raspberry leaves where the sun hits them, they're red, but in the crevices, they're green. That tells you something. When a plant in the fall goes away, what you see is the green. The green will be in the margins of the leaf surrounded by a yellow, and the leaf is red. The green is the one that's the closest down in the bottom. That's in the chloroplast and the cells in the cell, and that's going down into the stem to go into the cambiometa. And you see the plant, the colors of the plant are actually a dynamic. That's why I say this can be meditated. Ripen a peach in your mind and go backwards. Start with a green one and a yellow one and an orange, and then it goes to red, and then onto almost a purple, and then a purple back into a red, and back into an orange, back into yellow, back into a green. Grow the peach in a color sequence, and you are connecting to the archetypal elementary beings that stand behind the creating of the phenolics in the protection of the peach seed. Hopefully that made sense to you. But it's a meditation.
Does the word phenolics mean the light, the quality of the color?
So phenolics are higher, more complex molecules that are built by the plant. In the beginning, they're not present there because the very fine little leaves are just processing chlorophyll. Chlorophyll breaks down into fatty acids and alcohols, and eventually the phenolics become very complex fatty acids and oils and essential oils and resins, your medicinals. But they start out as alcohols and fatty acids, and they become terpenes, and they become terpenoids when they get oxygenated and pollen. The chemistry of a plant is building from simple things up into more complex things, and that happens as the seed is developing. So the medicinal plant is taking the metals that are active and lifting up into more complex forms in order to protect the seed, and that's where the medicinal force comes in the pigments. In the phenolics and flavonoids and aldehydes and ketones. It's just language. It just means very complex molecules as opposed to very simple sugars and alcohols and broken up fatty acids that are not together. Just, fatty acids, adenine, guanine, cytosine, thymine, stuff that makes DNA. They're just acids that are free floating, they're trying to connect. Fatty acids and alcohols are very simple. But as the plant metabolizes and starts to process things, it gets higher up into the light, it becomes more vulnerable to UV. And as it becomes more vulnerable to UV, its own tissues become more vulnerable, and then especially the embryos become very vulnerable to too much light. So it has to protect them with either wood, which is the total end product. Once you get past resin, you're in wood world, and go back down and through essential oils and things. In the beginning, essential oils are attractants to a pollinator, but as they become more complex, they become protection against predators. That's what the plant is doing. Fragrances are there to attract in the beginning, the esters and things, simple chemistries to attract, and more complexes to repel.
So where does medicines that are roots come in?
Yeah, well, we'll get to that. Roots have a special contract. And things like mints have a special contract. They say, I want to pull the light in and put it down. So they have to form a special organ in the root to hold the pigment. So red root and all these things there, where you get your phenolics down in a root, there's always a color. Yeah, because it's pulling the light down. Pulling the light down, and that's what it does in us. Except it'd be pulling the light up. Because in us, it's reversed. Your head is the root, and your reproductive organs are, your flowers are down below. Yeah, so that's that. When we get to that, that's how we'll use this as it's a way of looking. That comes from Paracelsus. And Rudolf Steiner resurrected it and gave it to the BD people. Okay, so the mineral body, the way it operates is that these metals are, one is going to the next, going to the next, going to the next. And that's the sequence. So if you look on the handout, go to the right-hand side, it says coagula and solvay. So this is another meditation that you can do with pictures. Coagula is things that are coagulating and forming and falling. They tend to be in a pull of gravity. So in the soil solution or in plant solution, the very great coagulator is calcium. And in the language of soil science, they say it's unavailable. Calcium is unavailable. And the reason why it's unavailable is because it tends to fix things. But that's its function in the physiology of a plant, is to be present in a very strong way in the cell wall. And the cell wall needs to be stable and fixed, especially in a plant cell. So calcium is in the realm of coagula. And soil science says it's unavailable. So if you look there, so under the list there, it says calcium, best from limestone, base for all mineral molecules to form reactions, enhances foliar feeding, forms molecular paths, means that it's forming fixed things. In the plant, calcium is forming things that get fixed. Stimulates microbes on soil fauna linked to nitrogen, strong root and leaf formation, builds cell walls. It's all forming. Calcium is forming, makes the wall. But it requires that it has sulfur to move it. And sulfur's just wants to kind of, if you strike a match to a sulfur rock, it gets on flame and goes to the next county. So that's the sulfur process, that's solve. This dissolving. There's forming and coagulating and fixing and dissolving and flowing. That's solve. Those coagula and solve are the two great principles in alchemy. Solve is represented as sulfur or phosphorus. And they're dissolving. They're very mobile, and they pick metals up like calcium and allow the metals to keep fixing and moving, fixing and moving, fixing and moving, fixing and moving. Sulfur keeps the calcium rolling, makes it available. The calcium is select down in the lower left, calcium is selectively mobile. It's the strongest fixing agent for phosphorus and potassium. So calcium says, thank you, phosphorus, for getting me moved. Thank you, sulfur, for moving me. Now come here and sit with me on the hammock. So if there's available calcium in the soil, the plant can lift it. If there's sulfur and nitrogen and phosphorus, can lift the calcium and say, come on, let's keep moving. And calcium going, well, yeah, thank you, I'll move, but I want to sit down. No, let's go. It's like taking a walk with your 2-year-old. Come on, it's just another block. I'm not gonna go, you're gonna pick me up. That's calcium. Very stable, very fixed, it moves and then it sits, and then it moves and then it sits. And phosphorus is like, let's go to the moon. Let's just explode out of here. Sulfur is like, just dissolve, just be mobile, come on.
So is this chelation?
So we're getting towards chelation, exactly, good for you. So the issue with chelation is what grabs what? We're going to go to chelation, yes. So we have to understand that I need certain things to grab metals and I need other things to release metals. Because some metals want to move and others just don't want to move. And there's this whole science between, nutrition of calcium and can I take it as chelated calcium? I have to attach it to a metal. And then it becomes mobile. Yeah, very good. This is chelation. So as we go along, we'll look at chelation because down the road, we're going to talk about making sprays out of gems and chelating them in a compost heap. Because it turns out that the greatest chelators are protein structures that you find in humus. So you can actually make plant sprays out of gems with your metals at parts per million and chelate them in a compost heap so that your foliar spraying is much more productive. That's where I want to go with this, because you can design or sprays to make the phenolics more active through copper. But that's down the road. Because I'm going to put an underpinning under it. But you can do this. But you have to understand this is down in parts per million world where too much copper is toxic, but if you get it to chelate organically, the plant can make a choice. Because it's already been, the soil flora and fauna have already chelated it into a protein structure that the plant recognizes. So there's less of a danger of overstimulating a plant with that type of spray of copper. Yeah. It's kind of one of those. But that's where I want to go with this. But in order to go there, we have to understand a little bit of the basic ideas. Because you can actually spray things on plants to get much better medicinal properties. They can take the light better. You can spray gems on them, and they will get a better relationship to light. And that will help them then form better medicinal. Okay, but the basis is this. But it is chelation. Yeah, but
And it's all about the relationship of the plant to light.
totally. I'm done. That's it, you got it. It's all about light. You got the pumpkin for the day, yeah, right. It's all about light. It's all about light, but really, really. Not just as a convenient metaphor for weak minds, Light, it's all light. It's just, there's a rule in antenna theory. Your antenna has to be a picture of the signal. And that's all we're trying to do. We're just trying to regulate that plant so that the signal is its archetype. We have to make the plant be lawful in such a way that all of the processes in it are pictures of the archetype. That means regulating the soil, that means sprays, that means fertilizing, that means compost preps, that means, If you do that, the plant is going to is an image of what it wants to receive from the light. That becomes a perfect antenna for receiving those particular qualities. but it needs to have form qualities. Form. So some things wants to form in a very solid way. Some things want to form and be able to dissolve easily. That's form. When Rudolf Steiner says form, that's what he means. Not form as a fixed thing, but form as an activity. Formative thinking. So a typical example is potassium is much more mobile than calcium. And calcium is much more mobile than magnesium. Magnesium is much more mobile than silver, and silver is much more mobile than gold. You know, but not by a lot, but you get the picture. So as you go from the reactive metals to the noble metals in the metals, you're going away from reaction into fixedness. And transformation, you want to get some good energy in the interaction. That's why most of the metals that are active in plants are very active. They're very reactive. Because the plant has to interact with the mineral body of the earth. And it has a tough time picking up gold. You have to do things with it to get it to pick up gold. But it doesn't have a tough time picking up potassium because that's what it's NPK. That's available. Okay? We okay out there, or are you brain dead yet? Pretty much brain dead, I know. Okay, so there's a way to understand this. So look up at the top. This is about weathering. Up at the top it says weathering of common rocks. So if you go out and you get a piece of granite, have a chunk of granite, we're going to look. This afternoon we're just going to play with all this. I have a box of rocks out there. We're going to play all afternoon with rocks. But hopefully when you're playing, you'll have some pictures. So that's what I'm trying to do. I'm front loading so that you can kind of play. Okay, so if you pick up a piece of granite, granite is made of feldspars, micas, and quartz. Those are the three constituents. And we'll, as we play with the rocks, we'll look at them. Secondary minerals of feldspars is clay. Secondary minerals of micas is clay. So the major constituents of granite weather out to be different kinds of clay. And the reason why they weather out to be different kinds of clay is plants need clay in order to be able to interact with the mineral body of the earth. That's cation exchange capacity. That's clay. Well, most of the rocks weather out to be a clay. Some form of clay, a very fine clay or a very coarse clay, a very dense clay, a floated clay, plastic clay, non-plastic clay. There's all these different grades of clay depending upon what kind of feldspar and what kind of mica. So there's feldspar that's very rich in calcium. That's called orthoclase feldspar. You may have heard of that. And that's a very dense, rigid, feldspathic rock that makes very dense, rigid clay, like fire clay or the stuff they make heat shields for spacecraft out of. Very dense clay, not plastic at all. There's a high silica content and weathers out. It's very dense, usually orange. Like foothills. So that kind of bomb-proof clay up there is called laterite. And it was formed in a volcano as a dike where there was a lot of calcium feldspar. It made it a very dense rock called greenstone. And the greenstone is those tombstone rocks that are sticking up as you're going up through Route 49. Those rocks that stick out, look like tombstones. Those are old volcanic dikes. And if you go up to them, they're orange on the outside, but if you hit them with a hammer, they're green on the inside. So the green rock is usually a calcium feldspar that has a lot of iron. So go down and look down in basalt. Down there, you under basalt you have feldspars, but you have FeMg minerals. FeMg are known as mafic minerals. They also make clay, but they make really, really dense laterite clay from basalt. And the basalt has very, very small crystals because it erupts and goes up near the surface and cools very quickly. Not very big crystals form. That's basalt. It's very dense. You hit a piece of basalt with a hammer, it rings like a bell. It's vitrified and very dense. So the clays that come out of it are very dense. If it lays underground for a long time, bigger crystals can form that organize themselves. Then you get granite out of the same magma. So this is a meditation. Go out and get a piece of the tombstone rock and get some of your laterite clay and put them on your windowsill where you wash your dishes. And every time you go to wash the dishes, kind of imagine what is happening between the greenstone rock and that laterite clay. And then find out a puddle that's on your land if you're up there. And you see on the top of the puddle, when the water goes down, there's an even finer clay. And put that next to the laterite. And that is a meditative sequence to contact the mineral elementary beings that are standing behind the geology on which you are walking. Rudolf Steiner told the doctors, when you move into a new place, you need to understand the geology of what's underneath where you are practicing. Because the geology of what you are practicing is going to give you the kind of conditions you're going to meet in the lungs of the patients that come to you. That the kind of crystallizing force that's present in the land is what raises up through their organism, especially in the realm of the lung. The lung is concerned with earth and water. Am I depositing calcium carbonate in pneumonia, or am I getting the carbon out through carbon dioxide? That's the big concern for the lungs. So Rudolf Steiner said, if you're living on a soil where the carbon is being precipitated, you're going to have one whole other etiology of lung problems than if you're living in a soil where everything is volcanic and going up, or you're living on granite where everything, that the lung of the people is receiving that energy from the ground continually, and they take that into themselves, and that will be the type of affliction that the lung will have when you move to that new area. Will it be an inflammation, or will it be a deposition? Yes.
Talking about problems with lungs, when I was a child, I had problems with my lungs, and every time I went out to the ocean, it disappeared.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Does that has anything to do with the salt content?
Salt, that is being volatilized. Yeah. So this volatilizing and precipitating, volatilizing and condensing, that's the meditation. So the tombstone rock is a condensate of the laterite soil, and then we're going up to a more volatile form with a very fine clay in the pebble, or in the puddle. It's floated clay. Yeah. And you could, as you go and meditate that and look at that sequence of getting finer and then getting more coarse, depositing and fixing and becoming more mobile, that meditation of those imagery, that's a tool that you can use to transform yourself, to be able to understand what is happening in the soil where you're living. And it's the same down here. You can go from ridge to ridge here because of the river. I live in an area where if I go 3 feet down to put a fruit tree in and I'm digging, I hit river cobbles. I mean, I'm in basically a stream, which is why I have to use a broom to get the water out of my garage. You know, I mean, I'll put all kind of drainage in there, but it still wants to be a river. If I go 200 yards up and I go over just a little rise, the redwood trees there are 150 feet tall. Redwood trees on my side, where it's river cobbles, are about 50 feet tall. The ones on the other side, where the water has been deposited by an ancient stream that used to be there, you can get a mulberry tree that looks like a grandfather oak somewhere. And the mulberry trees where we are go down in there, and then they kind of doing this all kind of nodules and knots on them because they're struggling. Those are pictures. That's 200 yards of geology. Yeah. And so this kind of this is why I keep saying the minerals are something you can really use as a tool. Make friends with some kind of mineral. Make friends with a gem or some form of mineral and say, I'm going to study this. Get a piece of quartz or get a feldspar or something and just have it there and then get interested in it. There is a doorway. Rudolf Steiner said the entryway into higher worlds is through the crystals. They are an entryway, but they are very so lawful that they don't broach fools easily. So don't bring your weak stuff here because you're not going to get in. You need to adapt your consciousness to my lawfulness. So these diagrams here are just meant to be a kind of resource for you, that if you do that, if you pick something, pick a rock, and you begin to try to understand it, these alchemical diagrams, the background of this is soil science. And I don't want to make you more brain dead by just going into detail of this, but if you begin to take up the study of a particular mineral, try to locate it somehow on one of these charts, and it will guide you. So go to the upper right. This is the mineral cross system, the most basic form of minerals. So the earth mineral is carbon. And when carbon and calcium come together, they make lime. Calcium carbonate. The lime in the earth body is the representative of the gravity force. It pulls things down. And fixes them. So calcium is part of one, calcium carbonate. Carbon has a very rigid structure, and calcium is unavailable. You get the two of them together, you get a picture. Fixedness, precipitation, pulling things in. So the function of lime in the soil is to take what has rotted during the summer and to pull it in and bring it towards humus. Stoddard calls it fall lime or autumn lime, pulling things down into the earth, things that are rotting. And the things that are rotting rot and create acids, carbonic acid. And carbonic acid is the great source of weathering of how rocks become soil. So the lime in the soil takes in acids and holds them and brings them in contact with the feldspars. Through solutions of plants and animals rotting, their solutions, when they do that, have in them carbonic acid. And the carbonic acid goes down into the ground and goes into the little spaces where things are like clay. They have little layers in them, little spaces. The carbonic acid goes in there and etches into those layers and pulls out potassium and calcium and magnesium out of the spaces and makes them mobile for the soil solution. And that's called weathering.
Plenum. Did you say plenum? Did you say plenum, Dennis?
Weathering.
Weathering. Sorry, couldn't hear.
Yes, it's weathering. Weathering is when weak carbonic acid solutions from rotting things seeps into the spaces of feldspars and clays. And that etches them and makes what's in the rock fluid. And what's in the rock that is fluid is potassium and calcium and sodium and magnesium and lithium and boron. These metals that want to be reactive, they react and become mobile and flow out into the soil away from the rock and become what is known as soil sap or soil solution. Plant roots and the soil solution is solutes at a molecular level that have forms of these metals that are interactive. And the plant roots need to have that solution in contact with their root because they can't do that themselves. But they look for sources where they can find that. The plant roots do. So where they find that is in clays that have flat shingle shapes that are laid up with each other, that is clays and micas and feldspars. And the plant root goes in and spreads out flat on the surface of these little spaces in between, spreads out with these very, very fine hairs, and right where the juice is coming and creating the potassium flow, they're like, and that has a word.
Humus.
That's humus. So the more interweaving, the more inner layers between the clay and the humus and this carbonic acid, the soil solution, the more there is that kind of colloidal molecular clay structure, the more the plant has no stress when there's drought. Because it has an infinite inner root hairs all in these little layers in there that are protected. Yeah? That's a function of humus. It has to do with the weathering of the feldspars and the micas into clays, so that there can be cation exchange capacity within the soil to interact with the plant root. Hopefully that made sense. Okay, that's your basic model of what a mineral is doing in connection to a plant. That's the one side, the fluid side. The other side is there needs to be air in there. Or if it was all just humus and it got wet, then you have gumbo. And then you leave your boots in it. Walking around, you're very rich, but don't go out there to try to pick your onions when it rains, you know. So that's the other side. So for that, you need to have what's known as pore space. Pore, P-O-R-E, pore space in the soil, pore space. P-O-R-E. And the pore space is created by the silicates that don't break down the quartz. They get crunched into granules. And the granules are irregular. And where they're irregular, you have little pores are created. And in the pores, then you can have breathing. So you have a kind of volatilizing space by these silicates that are dense and then hardly weather at all. So your granite, if you have granite soil, is made of quartz. It is made of feldspar, mica, clay forming, and quartz. Aeration. And the plant root is getting what it needs. Some plants have to have a lot more aeration than others. A lot of the medicinals have to be able to breathe. They have their origin in the high country and in arid places where there's granite breakdown and the soil is almost, there's hardly any humus in it at all. In wild places, there are almost no humus at all. It's all mycorrhiza because there's no humus. So if you take a plant that's an upland plant as a medicinal and you bring it down and put it in a humus-rich compost soil that Hazel has been supplying with manure for the last 20 years, it's going to say, can I breathe a little bit here? And it just gets big and floppy and then gets mold and then goes away. Yeah, we know this. Okay? So there has to be a sense that this plant came from an upland place, but maybe it grows down by the seashore because in the place where it was developed, the upland met the coast. And so it likes to have granular soil, but it likes to have moisture on its leaves. So don't put it on the south side of a slope that you've put a lot of humus in, because it's going to rot, sure as looking at it. So this is, when I say mineral, this is what I'm speaking, not just as kind of chemistry stuff, but an understanding of what granite is as opposed to basalt and how the fixed part and the fluid part relate, that's useful. Okay, so the fixed parts come out of the lime, and the airy parts are the silicates. Now, it turns out that 10% of the rocks are alkaline and limestone, and 90 or 85% of them come from silica.
90%?
Pretty close. So even basalt is a silicate, which is most of the earth. And then the continents are granite, which is siliceous. But the Romans had a saying, all lime comes from worms. That was, all lime comes from worms. So the silicates are very slow in breaking down, but they have the potential within them to hold certain metals that are very active in terms of chelation. Iron, magnesium, things like that. They're very active. So when the silicates have in them these other metals as mixtures, they start to break down and form gem forms. And all the silicates breaking down as they start to form gem forms and plutons and different forms in the rock, there's something called rock milk. And rock milk is a process in the earth that is universal. And it's formed where surface water somehow gets access to lower areas and comes under pressure. The pressure of tectonic plates and fracture lines and things like that in the plates, and or a discontinuity between one mass and another mass. It's called a terran, where you have a limestone mass and then a silica and then something else and something else. Those discontinuity areas, water can percolate down. And when water percolates down, those rock masses are under pressure from huge masses of rock that are still migrating because the seafloor is spreading. And through the rising of molten globs to push up a mountain. So the crust is very unsettled, even out in Denver. So as things are moving and flexing, there are temperature differences in the earth that are created. And under pressure, the lower parts of the rock become kind of gelatinous. They become a little more fluid. And when surface water goes down into those more fluid areas, it gets very hot, and pressure pushes it through the pores of the silica rocks. And as it moves through, it's pulling ions out of what is there and moving them downstream. The ions are metals that are in the silicates, and they go and they collect in a particular area and make tourmaline or amethyst or jasper or chalcedony or whatever. And the forming of those different gem pockets is through the migration of rock milk through the pores in large masses of rock that is continually flowing, moving metals from one place to another. It's called rock milk.
I was watching a video and this geologist found tourmaline in different areas. And they were like, they had these milk, this substance like milk. I was just like, whoa,
Yeah, rock milk.
red milk, yeah.
Rock milk. So this is happening as the plates are moving, and they are flexing and pushing waves of rock milk through the rock masses, combing out metals and depositing them in particular areas. Then you get gems. The gems result from the migration of the metals.
So when you hear lab-created minerals, they're just making rock milk.
Yeah. That's the whole computer industry is based on rock milk, synthetic rock milk. But they have to dope it, they call it doping, they dope it with parts per million of titanium or rutile or whatever, so that it becomes a semiconductor. There's a charge and a not charge and a not charge, that's a semiconductor within the molecular structure of the silicon. There's a push-pull happening, and you put a weak charge on one side, and so like that's carried through the rock, through the little chip to another spot. They have to be perfectly formed, but they form them in the way that I'm describing to you. They just have a big vat of doped silica that they have a small crystal rotating in for days, pulling off molecular layers and winding it like a toilet paper roll to make a crystal. And then they slice it and it's perfect, all parts are perfect. That's what's in your cell phone. Yeah, doped silica.
So gems are sort of like rock cheese.
Rock cheese. That's what happens to your brain when you spend too much time on your cell phone. Rock cheese. Okay, so this is a process that is happening of migration of metals through silica that creates what are known as silicates. And the silicates then are all the different gem forms of silica, which there are many, many, many. That means a particular gem has a particular configuration of certain metals. That's why you can use gem powders to spray on plants, because they can deliver parts per million of boron to a plant, which is the plant regulator of all its chelating photosynthesis properties, boron, from rose quartz. So, yeah, so that's the silicates. So we have the fixedness and then this kind of continual evolution of the silicates to become some other thing. It's kind of an air process, although it's carried through rock milk. And rock milk is water. If you look on your diagram there, water is the feldspar. Because the first step out of the silicates is some form of clay or something that then starts to weather, and the rock milk then flows through, and so we have earth with the lime, fixedness, and earth is the last part of this process. Once the feldspars take over and there's fluid and calcium in the seawater, then worms pick it up and make shells that become lime. That's why all lime comes from worms.
Wow, that was a long way getting back to that. Okay.
We got there. So, in order to get to Earth, the worms need some energy. They need to metabolize through sulfur and phosphorus. So you get your sulfates and phosphates. We have carbonates, feldspathics, silicates, sulfates, and phosphates. Four great divisions of the mineral. Phosphates are kind of energetic. Carbonates are fixed. Feldspars are the fluid part, and then the silicates are kind of the, I'm giving it all. And you have then the mineral cross. That comes from alchemical tradition, the mineral cross. And the mineral cross is a good way to try and understand rocks. Is this a kind of fixed quality, or is this more fluid? Is it open? Is it granular? And when we come back in the afternoon, we'll have the box of rocks. We'll play games with that. We'll talk about a way of working with minerals so you can begin to identify these things. And then once you begin to identify, start collecting. If you go down the American River here, a couple of years ago as Christmas, my oldest granddaughter was just starting to be a burgeoning science person. And I thought, well, gee, what can I do for Christmas for her? And then I thought of an idea. I just went down to FER. I walked up and down. I'd go maybe once every 2-3 weeks, or after there was a storm, I'd go and I would pick up pebbles until my pants started to fall down, and then I tumbled them in a rock tumbler. And once I made something called a box of rocks. And what we did was I just wrote a history of California geology for a kid using pebbles. And you can find the whole enchilada on the banks of the American River, because it all washed down out of the hills from the high country in the Sierras through all the volcanics, down through the detritus, down on the valley floor, blah, 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 blah. Little limestone things in bays in Folsom. You can find the whole thing in pebbles. History of California. But they're all covered in mud. So you have to kind of pick them up and clean them off. But I have a box of them in the back that we'll play with in the last session, because if you tumble them, they are remarkably beautiful. And just so pristine in their wisdom of coagula and solvate. The whole thing is right there, just in a few pebbles. So, I know this was a lot, and I apologize in a way for it.
This is awesome, don't
Yeah.
apologize. This is so great. Yeah, don't apologize.
Stop.
We will keep up with you.
It's gonna explode, but don't stop.
But it's a scaffolding.
Totally.
It's a scaffolding.
Yeah.
And I don't want to go more into the conceptual side of the mineral, but and we'll play this afternoon with actual rocks, and it'll be a lot of fun. But if you really want to understand medicinal properties of plants, I would really suggest you study geology, even in a rudimentary way. get the little golden book of rocks.
I need.
And take a walk. And take a walk, and you'll see, it's amazing, especially if you live around here, like I say, that there's some unbelievable pebbles just down on the banks of the river that are showing the history of this land. Okay, so I highly recommend this book. If you really want to educate yourself about
Is that a
essential
book that's
oils.
easy to get? Is that an Amazon book? Is
Yeah.
that-
Yeah.
What's the name of it?
Yeah. It's called The Healing Intelligence of Essential Oil. Don't forget to get a lens. Get a lens. And your search term is phthalate. Now we'll come back after lunch and play. So happy break.